dear friend of mine had mentioned that she was going to be doing a psychedelic medicine journey. And at that point, I had never worked with psychedelics before. I had never really dabbled in anything of that nature. And I said, you know what? Why not? Like, I am just looking for things that can help me at this point. And so worked with a woman who's now my mentor and a dear friend of mine, and she served me my first medicine ever. And it completely changed my perspective on life. It helped me realize that the constructed self that I was operating from wasn't necessarily the same as my true self and the deep down authentic version of me. I started training to serve the medicine and then decided that in order to be able to legally serve it, I would form a church that then allowed this to be considered a sacrament and protected under the Religious Freedoms Act, and then built this in addition to my corporate work to make sure that I could then work with executives to have similar or the same outcomes as I did.
Welcome to the Conscious Leadership Revolution podcast, where conscious leaders unite to unlock their highest potential so we can change the way the game is being played. Welcome to the Conscious Leadership Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Susan Hobson, and I am back at this helm and so excited to be here because I have a very special guest that I have been running a pretty long and deep scouting report on for these last 2 months or so. And I just couldn't wait to get him into studio and introduce him to all of you. This is my friend, Robert Lennox. He is a Harvard Business School MBA and entrepreneur and C-suite executive who founded Jaguar House Ministries, a California religious organization dedicated to the legally protected practice of psychedelic medicine. Over nearly a decade, he has facilitated hundreds of executives, founders, and civic leaders through the Enlightened Executive Program, which we are definitely going to talk about today. He is a two-time under 40 winner and has been featured in Time, Forbes, Fast Company, and Harvard Magazine. Robert brings a first-of-its-kind perspective, a Harvard MBA and former private equity-backed CEO operating a legally protected religious organization for psychedelic-assisted leadership transformation. Writing for the leadership audience without diluting either credential. He is literally in LA. Oh, no, he's in Brooklyn today, but he is from LA.
That's right.
On the opposite coast to me. And then, I wanted to ask you, because I know we were talking off mic about something really exciting that you recently initiated or got called to. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this most recent mission that you're on?
Sure. Yes. Well, Susan, it's such a privilege to be here with you today. Thank you for having me. Yeah, one of the more recent career moves I've made is I've joined a biotech company as the chief commercialization officer. And what we do is stem cell therapies for bone and cartilage replacement, mostly for knee purposes right now. But it really has applicability for any place in the body where you might need those. So, blending a little bit of my corporate background with the science, with kind of the vision for having an impact for people in the future.
And that's kind of where I want to jump in first, is really understanding, you have this really academic background like I do. You're rooted in high-level business experience. And now we're about to talk about your psychedelic church that you founded in LA. So I'm curious if you could unpack for our audience just a little tiny bit of that hero's journey in terms
Yeah.
of what called you to make this pivot, what called you to this space.
Yeah, well, it was born out of a place of crisis for me, which then kind of flourished into a real sense of calling and dedication. And so, about 10 years ago, when I was building my first business, I got to a place in building it where I was completely lost in terms of what my purpose was, why I was doing what I was doing, and how to actually see my way out of it. It felt like I was trapped in a box that I had built for myself. And so a dear friend of mine had mentioned that she was going to be doing a psychedelic medicine journey. And at that point, I had never worked with psychedelics before. I had never really dabbled in anything of that nature. And I said, you know what? Why not? Like, I am just looking for things that can help me at this point. And so worked with a woman who's now my mentor, and a dear friend of mine, and she served me my first medicine ever. And it completely changed my perspective on life. It helped me realize that the constructed self that I was operating from wasn't necessarily the same as my true self and the deep down authentic version of me. And a lot of what I had built up in my career was a version that met the expectations of other people
Mhm.
or was able to compete with other people or was able to, insert whatever words here in the blank. And it was all external rather than internally driven. And so after my first ceremony, I became really intent on working with these medicines as a way of cultivating a deeper sense of self, but also letting go of all of this external patterning and conditioning and kind of not necessarily the false self, but the performing self that I had been holding on to for such a long time. And so as I did more and more of this work, I realized that this was something, one, that could not only help me and people like me, but something that I really wanted to be able to do for other people in service of them. And so at a certain point, I started training to serve the medicine, and then decided that in order to be able to legally serve it, I would form a church that then allowed this to be considered a sacrament, and protected under the Religious Freedoms Act. And then built this in addition to my corporate work, to make sure that I could then work with executives to have similar or the same outcomes as I did, as I was kind of going through this journey of self-exploration.
I love it. And this is where you and I definitely align. We're both on this mission to change the way the game is being played from
Mm,
the inside out. And I call that
yes.
conscious leadership, hence the name of the show we're on. So I'm just curious if we could get into alignment in terms of what that concept means to you, because it seems to me that you're trying to attract that type of leader yourself with this
Yes.
mission that you've gone on by starting this church.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think for a while, and we see this so prevalently nowadays, the term leadership, quote unquote, is perceived by so many people as power over.
Hmm.
And so they view it as somehow they've earned a position to be able to have power over others, power over circumstances, environments. And for me, conscious leadership is really about understanding how you have power for and who the people are who you can impact and what the things that you can do, can be as a result of the leadership that you actually embody. And I think so much of the gap there between power over and power for is the ego. And I think
Hmm.
the best way to dissolve the ego and the performing self is to use different modalities for a lot of introspection, whether it's meditation, whether it's psychedelic medicine, whether it's anything else. I think doing that internal work allows us then to step into the place of being able to have power for.
And some might say that that is where the locus of control exists, right? Most is
Yes,
within the changes that we can affect within ourselves. And this is
correct.
what called me to this modality because I've notoriously spoken on this show about how the way I've built my methodology over the last 20 years is that I saw different modalities were really serving my clients and then experienced some of how that was possible for myself and then started to integrate it into my practice. So when I first discovered psychedelic medicine 2 years ago and had that
Mm,
experience after watching a whole bunch of my leaders come back from the jungles of Peru and South America and Costa Rica
mhm.
and a scientist in the lab cannot deny the data, in terms of
Right.
the before and after, in terms of what was made possible in that brain.
Yes.
So this is why I think you and I are so passionate about spreading the ripple effect, just purely from a consciousness standpoint in terms of awareness around this powerful modality. We kind of share the belief that this is going to be an even bigger technology than AI, right? You called it
Yes.
HI a second ago, and I want you to unpack that. But Rick Doblin, who's one of the godfathers of this space and started MAPS, right, in the 70s, that program that does psychedelic-assisted therapy with MDMA, and I think they do a couple of other modalities now too, or medicines. But I was listening to him on a podcast last week with Joe Rogan, and he was predicting that these types of healing centers are going to be on every street corner within the
Mm.
next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah.
And people who aren't in this space might be like, what? Like, not see that coming. But I think this is why
Right.
we want to have this conversation today because it's coming. I
Yeah.
truly believe that a leader is going to need this type of consciousness training modality more than any leadership development training or modality or program because this is really where we're at with technologies like AI. The game is
Yeah.
changing and it's
Yes.
changing faster at a faster rate than we have probably ever seen. And so we know what happens to the brain when change starts to accelerate and disruption hits, right? It triggers the ego, it triggers the amygdala. And
Yes.
so I kind of agree with Rick Doblin's prediction, but what are your thoughts in terms of everything that I just sort of riffed on and unpacked there?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I have tremendous amount of respect for Rick. He's such a leader in the space, and I think it would be wonderful to see clinics for this popping up everywhere if done right and in the
Yeah.
right way, right? With intention and rigor and backed by science.
Hmm.
Because one of the reasons I founded the church was to do this above ground and not underground, which so
Hmm.
much of a lot of
Hmm.
medicine work is done.
Hmm.
And so I have really extensive intake forms and do a thorough intake process with everybody that I work with to make sure that there's safety and there's rigor behind the work that we do. And so from a clinic popping up every block in the next 10 to 20 years standpoint, I think that would be incredible if we're doing it from a conscious leadership standpoint, right? Like
Hmm.
the medicine space also has to embody conscious leadership rather
Hmm.
than just being evangelical about this without regard for how we're doing it.
Hmm.
But I think, the point that you made about this being backed by science.
Hmm.
Science is still only because now we're finally getting funding for studying all of this medicine, and the stigma of it has kind of gone
Hmm.
away from a political and government standpoint for enough of us to get some funding behind it.
Hmm.
But the reality is that these medicines, we'll take psilocybin, for example. It's been proven that using psilocybin has the ability to either create new or revive old synapses in the brain, and connections between neurons. And in a way that the placebo group can't match.
Oh,
And
wow.
unlike anything else that we've seen out there, psychedelics have the ability to kind of light up the brain in an incredible way. And if anybody's experienced what are called those shower moments where, you're standing in the shower doing something and then you have an aha moment, that's what working with psychedelics is like. And what we've seen is that because of the ability to connect those neurons and carve new neural pathways, we're almost letting go of old patterns and overlaid patterns that have contributed to the performing self. And
Hmm.
so this allows us to, as we're creating these new neurons, to tap in deeper to our more authentic, deeper self, our inner self, and our inner knowing, which then allows us to emerge from a ceremony, a psychedelic ceremony, feeling like we have a better sense of ourselves and our purpose and what we're meant to do in this lifetime. And so the executives that I work with time and time again, when they come out of ceremony, every single time they say to me, I feel like there's a part of myself that I'm getting to know again for the first time. And there's something really lovely about that and the optimism that comes with it, especially when there's somebody in a position of power to be able to do something good with it.
Oh, that's the whole point. I feel to the call is that we have a responsibility with things changing so fast, AI being the driver of that for the most part, right? I
Yeah,
think there's a lot of concern in the ethers about
there is.
whether we're going to go left or right as the humans that are
Mhm.
responsible for this incredible technology, And I think
Yeah,
that's probably also why I'm feeling the call to talk about consciousness so much in the context of leadership, right?
right.
Because when you look across all boards of leadership, economically, socially, politically, I
Yes.
think this is what we're all seeing is the problem, are
Yes.
the ones that haven't done that work enough to really understand who's at the helm. in their
Hmm.
decision making, right?
Truly.
And so, yeah, I think that's where psychedelic medicine can come in. And so I want to talk about it because we're calling it medicine, but then we're also calling it a technology.
Yes.
And then we're putting it next to AI and we're calling it HI. So can we unpack what HI means first and
Sure.
foremost and explore
Yeah.
that contrast a bit?
Well, and you and I, before we started recording, had talked about this, and I said human intelligence, HI, is actually the way by which we can coexist with AI. But I would actually adjust that and call it humane intelligence rather than human.
Mm,
Because these technologies that we have through psychedelic medicine are actually humane. And part of the doctrine that I have for Jaguar House is, and informing the church, you have to create a doctrine. And my philosophy is, but for our existence, these substances would not be psychedelic. And so there's something really incredible about the humaneness of
mhm,
these medicines and these technologies, which they're both simultaneously, um, that allow us as humans to be more humane, to embody our truest selves more. And I
mhm,
think, the point you made about people in power is really interesting, right? Because there's an element of power when it's overlaid on top of an inauthentic self or a performing self that
mhm,
can then lead people to be even further away from their true selves.
mhm,
And my philosophy around this is if we can help people build up their internal integrity and their internal sense of self to
mhm,
such a foundational and concrete sense
mhm,
that once they do get power, it's not leading them astray. It's not
mhm,
letting them be, quote unquote, corrupted into believing that they have power over rather than power for. It's
mhm.
power given to people who can hold it properly and with the right integrity.
That word responsibility comes up for me right there too,
Yeah.
right? And it's the word I often use when I'm talking about the concept of power, right? Is
Okay.
like having power starts with responsibility,
Yeah.
claiming responsibility or ownership for something or someone. But I think that that can get a little confusing sometimes in our interpretation of what that actually means in practice, especially as a leader, right?
Yes.
I like to talk about responsibility as a good thing because when we claim it, we become powerfully responsible. That's where
Yes.
that locus of control lives again, right?
Truly.
But no, I think what happens when we are unconscious at the helm in our leadership is that we don't necessarily understand how our insecurities can
Mm.
actually start to distort our perspectives of what it
Yes.
is we're actually responsible for, you
Yes.
know? And I think this is where I want to go next with you because I think it would be really useful for us to give an example of what this actually can look like in the experience of a leader who's under
Yeah.
the gun, high pressure, high stakes, does have a lot of responsibility, including responsibility for the people that he's holding that space for in terms of their potential and their impact in this world. So I want to just break down how we might see a practical example of a leader maybe who comes unconsciously into one of these experiences and what actually can get turned on when with these medicines or this technology and how that actually can be game changer in terms of his actual leadership.
Yeah. Well, and the point that you made about power having a magnifying effect on whatever is there is really the core premise of why I built out what I call the Enlightened Executive Program that I run.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
so most of what I do in that, I work with 5-MeO DMT, which is also known as BUFO. And so I've worked with high power execs of Fortune 500 companies. I work with Hollywood celebrities. I work with people who are really in places where they can influence things disproportionately because of the power that they have.
mhm,
And so the way I work through this program, I do regular ceremonies as well. But with the Enlightened Executive Program, it's kind of a 3-week program where every single Monday morning at 6 a.m., we work with 5-MeO DMT. And it's a standard dose. And the way that 5-MeO kind of works is it allows you to connect with everything around you and sort of dissolve the individual and the ego a lot, which then leads into the concept of ego death and everything that can be discussed around that. But most of what I do with these executives in the program is we start with medicine first thing Monday morning. And then throughout the week, we have coaching calls and journal prompts and integration support so that as they're living their daily life, they can actually tie back to their ceremony experience and their experience with the medicine, how the impacts of that are actually playing out for them, or what are the revelations, or what are the perspectives that are changing. Or even I had a client recently who said, I have more moments before my moments. And
Mhm.
there's something really beautiful about that, where it's the respond, not react type
Mhm.
of dynamic.
Mhm.
And for somebody who is in a position of power and who is a leader, the ability to have that extra little moment where it's tethered to something authentic and it's tethered to a sense of responsibility, as you were saying, is
Mhm.
really what makes the difference. Because as we have those ripple effects
Mhm.
of our choices and our actions, that little moment before the moment can
Mhm.
be a complete change of 180 of what ends up happening. And so I've seen with these executives who have gone through the 3-week program, their lives have changed in terms of their work and their purpose, their personal relationships, their relationship to themselves. And so the business that I've been running in that is really at this point now word of mouth, because the people who go through the program are so enthusiastic and evangelical about it that they tell their friends, they tell their colleagues, and I now have a wait list of people who have been signing up for this, excited just to be able to work together with these medicines and with the program.
Well, I think that's why we're seeing the predictions that we're seeing, right? We're going through a bit
Mm,
of a renaissance period, people are saying, with these medicines, right? In terms of this revitalization of they're just awakening to the potentials that have existed
yeah.
since the sands of time of humanity. But I think that this is what we're talking about when we're talking about executives tapping into this, because I
Yeah.
don't want people to think because we're calling it medicine that this is just something that people are going to heal their deep, deep trauma,
Yeah.
That's something I'm also passionate about illuminating is just like the application of these medicines can be so useful in so many areas of growth and leadership and influence. And you're talking about how, 5-MeO as an example really helps people get to know their authentic self. And some of these folks can be so unconscious, right? Because of the level of
Mm,
pressure that they're under and being stuck in those sympathetic overdrive states, it's
yeah.
sometimes the first time they've actually consciously made contact with that sense of their core authentic self. But these are becoming more and more the table stakes of a leader's development. There's so much more pressure in 2026 for a leader to show up in
Yes.
his or her authenticity. People aren't buying it, right? When a leader shows up out of alignment with their truth, because we can feel it. We have a felt sense that recognizes that, right? In
Mm,
terms of the primal part of our brain. So I think that in and of itself is such a powerful example of why we're saying these are going to be the table stakes of a leader's development. Because, yeah, when I think about leadership and I'm a leadership coach, leadership is all about influence. And
yeah.
so much of that influence is not even coming from the words that you're using, right? As you're
Right.
leading your people in your businesses. So much of that, 93%, is coming from just the energy alone,
Truly.
right? And so this is why I coach leaders, whether they're doing psychedelics or not, into a space and place of alignment with their authentic self, or their capital S self, as we call it in IFS.
Hmm.
Because, yeah, not only is this where you're going to be the most impactful in terms of the most resourceful, right? Have like the biggest, most expansive cognitive capacity possible, which for high performing leaders is definitely something that they're looking for.
Right.
But yeah, just in terms of, and I think this is where the healing comes in, right? Is like it totally reorients your energy in terms of the world and how you show up in the world and how you interact with the people in your world. When you show up in a place and space of authenticity, that brings people in. That is
Yes.
what builds that trust and that rapport and thus that influence. So
Yes.
I'm glad that you highlighted that because I think just merely from a coaching perspective, that can be a really hard thing to do if you have been governing yourself subconsciously in this autopilot way, right?
Mm,
For a lifetime or a career span.
yeah.
I think that that's oftentimes a limitation that you can run into. But these medicines open up so much of that. And I want to talk about this because the other pieces of the equation, we've been calling it a technology. And this is why I think of it as a technology, is the amount of data that you get from
Yes.
these medicines, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm a mindset coach. And so it's all about altering our perspective. And the way that we alter our perspective is we need to see new proof. We need to see
Mhm.
new proof and evidence, right? Or we need
Yeah.
to look at old proof and evidence that substantiated a belief system so that we can actually see it through a new lens and start to see new proof that helps us reinterpret the past.
Yes.
So that's why we feel that this is a technology, is because the ability to acquire all that data and all that evidence, and the thing you were speaking about a second ago in terms of the neuroplasticity, that means we're
Mm.
able to reprogram and re-hardwire the hard drive.
Yes.
Who,
Absolutely.
what leader doesn't want access to their hard drive, right?
Right.
And their programming, especially when it comes to managing pressure, because
Yes.
ultimately that's often where those insecurities will get pulled up from underneath the leader's rug every single time.
Yes. And immediately too.
And immediately too. And so that's, I think, some of what I see as the biggest opportunity in this space. I want to ask you, like, what are your predictions in terms, because we talked about Rick Doblin, we talked about where we're at in the acceleration and disruption. My leaders, I'm coaching them in the trenches every day. They're up against it. I'm saying it's even more disruptive than the pandemic for a
Mm,
lot of these folks, right? Just in
yeah.
terms of the sheer growth spurt in terms of all the knowledge that has to be acquired and all the choices that have to be made in terms of creating these next level ideas based on this technology. But what do you predict over the next 5 to 10 years in terms of just our world as a whole in the leadership space? What do you predict is actually coming down this pipeline in terms of where leaders really going to need to be in their training?
Yeah, well, I think we're going to see a really stark bifurcation in the world of leadership between those who are willing to do this type of internal work that we're discussing and the ones who lean on old paradigms to continue having power over.
Hmm.
And so, as we do all of this, right, I don't think that psychedelic medicine is the one thing that everybody has to do. It's not for everybody. It is an option. It's a tool. It's a technology that's available to us. But so
Hmm.
is therapy. So is
Hmm.
breath work. So
Hmm.
is just meditation and general introspection.
Hmm.
And I think the ones who are predisposed to be willing to do all of these things to become better
Hmm.
versions of themselves are going to be the ones who embody all of these types of things, as you were talking about earlier.
Hmm.
And the people who step into the room, you can have two leaders step into the room, and one is somebody who's willing to do the internal work, one is somebody who's not willing to do the internal work. And exactly to your point, people will recognize the energy coming off of both of them.
Hmm.
And I think what we will see is leaders won't just be performing leadership or acting leadership. There's going
Hmm.
to be a beingness that comes with it and an embodiment that comes with it. And I think the beauty of the technological age and the age of the internet that we're in is, and the younger generation too, everybody has such an incredible nose for BS out there, more
Hmm.
so than ever before.
Hmm.
And I think we will be able as a society to pick out the people who are disingenuous or
Hmm.
simply operating from an old paradigm versus the ones who are really stepping into what the new paradigm needs to look like for a better world and a better, universe of leadership.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that that's I definitely aligned with that in terms of we got to be able to move into a space of creativity, and it's going to be
Mm,
really hard for a leader to get to the helm in his or her creativity
yes,
if they don't know themselves,
that's right.
right? Because there's a trust that needs to exist in order to be able to create this new world that we're talking about co-creating, right?
Yes,
Like, I think that's some of the intelligence from a spiritual perspective in terms of why AI is here, in fact,
that's right.
right? Is that it's actually going to push us back to the helm of our creative capacities. And
Truly.
so, yeah, and so I think that's where I go with my leaders. It's going to be a nervous system thing. If you don't understand whether it's breath work or cold tubs or meditations or retreats with medicine, if you don't understand how to train your nervous system to be able to access certain states like
Mm,
creativity,
yes.
yeah, I think you're going to really be up against it in terms of what the world is needing that you're not able to produce, in
Yes.
terms of a
And to hold the
capacity.
discomfort too.
Hmm.
Because I think creativity can come from a place of authenticity. But if discomfort exists, oftentimes we resort back to our old patterns or we resort back to the performing self.
Hmm.
And I think creation and creativity, there's a layering element of it,
Hmm.
where if our performing self is trying to create, we're then basically creating two levels and two layers of things
Hmm.
rather than creating one layer, which is off of our authentic self, off of our core being. What are we
Hmm.
then creating? And
Hmm.
so there's going to be this kind of separation of that layering that allows the people who are really doing this internal work,
Hmm.
who can connect with their authentic self and sit with discomfort to be able to create whatever this new world or this new version of the world will look like.
Yeah, that's definitely one aspect of the nervous system training that needs to be not only understood, but there needs to be some consciousness training practices in and around supporting.
Yes.
And I think, again, back to the medicines that we're talking about on this show today, I think that's the most exciting piece of the equation is just, for me at least, is just how it can hack into your nervous system and how it can help you find some of those release hatches, is what I call them, right? That
Mhm.
you're just not able to find consciously via the therapy or the coaching or the conversation. So if
Yeah.
anybody out there is listening to this show right now and feeling that call, whether it's because they're up against it in the disruption, they're stuck in a sympathetic overdrive, they're burning out because there's such like a high rate of change going on right now, or they've never met themselves. What are you talking about, Susan and Robert? The authentic self. If they're feeling some call towards any aspect of what we talked about today, yeah, where would you like everybody to reach out and find you to continue?
Yeah, so my website for Jaguar House is just at jaguarhouse.org.
Hmm.
But you can also find me on Instagram at underscore Bobby Lennox. And then I also publish a Substack called the Ego Death Dispatch. And so you can find me there as well.
Amazing. And do you have any final words of wisdom or inspiration for our audience before we say adieu?
Ooh, I think, everything that we talked about, there's, like we said, there's no one thing that is a solve. Everything
Hmm.
is complementary, and we should approach this from a holistic standpoint. And
Hmm.
one of the things that I love to use as a metaphor for psychedelic medicine work is, when you're working with a therapist or you're trying to develop a conscious understanding of yourself, it's like your therapist is a cook in your kitchen and they're working with the ingredients that you have available at your conscious level of understanding of yourself.
Hmm. Hmm.
And psychedelic medicine throws open all the cabinets and cupboards in your house, and you're able to see all of these other ingredients,
Hmm.
right? And this is where we're talking about the technology and the software of
Hmm.
the medicine actually upgrading the hardware of our brains and our minds. And through that, then integration and working with a therapist and processing all of this is really
Hmm.
important. But now your therapist, as the cook in your kitchen, can make so many more recipes and use so many more ingredients because you have access to all of this.
Hmm.
And so I encourage everybody who's listening and just everybody who's out there, again, psychedelics aren't the way by which you can do this, but try to find modalities for yourself by which you can access a lot of these other things that are stored in your subconscious, in your mind, because that will then allow you to get deeper and better perspectives on everything that you're currently working on.
Hmm. Some might say that's the purpose of it all, to know thyself, right?
Truly.
Yeah, this is actually a little bonus question I want to throw in because I'm feeling
Yeah.
called based on what you just said. What do you feel you want your legacy to be with this mission that you're on to raise all this
Oof.
consciousness in and around this magical capacity of these medicines we're talking about today.
Yeah, that's such a big and important question. And I grapple with this every day, and the answer changes a little bit every single day. But ultimately, when I was very young, one of the things that I said was that I wanted to leave every place, every person, every interaction better than I found it.
Mm.
And that still holds true. But I think now one of the things that we're seeing in 2026 is we're at such a pivot point in where humanity is going with so many things, right? Whether it's AI, whether it's leadership and conscious leadership. And I think if I can have any small role in helping guide where humanity is going, whether, it's one person who has a tremendous amount of power that they hold and the ripple effects of that can shine out, then that's amazing. But if it's a bigger impact than that, then that's great too. But ultimately, my time on Earth hopefully has had a positive impact on the people around me and the environment that I've been in.
Well, I can definitely be a testimony to that today. And anytime I've spoken with you, sir, I'm so grateful that you took the time to come in and share your brilliance with our audience. I know how much this is going to serve them right now, wherever they're at, and any of the things that they're up against. And I know they're going to want to reach out to you. So we're going to go ahead and link all those places to find Robert in the show notes, as well as the link to his website so you can investigate his program. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and helping us change the way this game's being played via conscious leadership. For all inquiries in and around any conscious leadership training that we're doing over here at Team Elite, you can find all that over at our website, elitehighperformance.com. Please help us spread this ripple effect. Robert and I are here to play our biggest impact game, as you can surely see. So help us make it count. Share it with a friend, a leader perhaps, or people on your team or in your family. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out the locker room door. That's it. That's all for today. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we will see you all next week.